that it is a popular hobby with some people, not just nerds either. Normal. Oh, sorry. It's mine to sell, though. I mean, I do own it. It's been in our family for a long time. There's some in there, 18-something, which I have no idea if they're real. I guess they could be fake. To my luck, they probably are fake.
This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins, here with my co-host, Michael Riedel of the New York Post. The Broadway season has started out with an extremely satisfying and, may I say, well-made play. We have with us here tonight its playwright, Theresa Rebeck, our good friend, back on Broadway for the first time.
Back on Broadway.
Back on Broadway. You're on Broadway the first time. And
you've finally gotten from off-Broadway to Broadway. After all these years, Theresa, you've made it.
Oh my God. People have been saying that to me, and I'm like, what were those 10 plays off Broadway? Was that like
that whole body of work?
Liver? I have 2 full volumes of plays.
Well, you got to Broadway because of, you have now for the first time a wonderful, first-rate, first-class Broadway director.
Yeah, I know you're supposed to. Yeah.
What a deft segue that was.
Yes, all right.
Doug Hughes, first-time guest on Theater Talk.
I'm very honored to be
here. He
here.
directed a play that we really love, Doubt, and a great production of Inherit the Wind last season on Broadway. Welcome to Theater Talk.
And a few other things, too, as well.
A few minor things.
Doug is now also taking over as the artistic director.
I'm actually called the resident director at the Roundabout
resident.
Theater.
Forgive me.
So what does that mean? You have to direct everything there at the Roundabout?
I don't know. As soon as I had a fancy title, I'm directing nothing at the Roundabout.
You're at the Manhattan Theater Club
with Theresa Rebeck. New play, Mauritius.
I'm an ambassador with a broad portfolio. I guess they'll think of something for me to do shortly. But
now, Theresa, Susan calls this play a well-made play. I would say neoclassical.
Thank you, Michael. I would say that too.
This is a play, and we don't want to give away the twists and the turns, but it's a play about a young woman who has in her possession some very, very valuable stamps. But it's so deftly done with intrigue and people trying to get at the stamps. What was the impetus, the inspiration, if you will, to write this kind of well-made neoclassical style play?
I actually think a lot of my plays drift toward the neoclassical in that they always sort of the nugget of the beginning of everything is sort of built on story and character, and I've never been really one to drift into deconstructed muddles.
Iphigenia 2.2.
Although I did finally kind
of
write
a
deconstructed play that's going to be done at Denver this year. But mostly that's where I tend to live. And I think that this one, I found that what everyone had gone through or what many of them had gone through previous to the play, that these characters would not talk about their past, and so that the entire play became about forward motion in a way, and that kind of, that there was a more ferocious drive. They had more hunger to break through whatever had been blocking them to get to the end of the play.
But where are we in the theater, Doug, that when I sat in your play, Mauritius, and then that there was like an end that resolved things, I was flabbergasted. I went, wow, there's a beginning and a middle and an end. How refreshing.
It's a great achievement to earn an ending. And Theresa does one of the things that I think is, the 10-point degree of difficulty with this script, which is turn it around within the last 30 seconds. There is some astonishment offered. And that is an extravagantly deft thing to do. Who does that? Hitchcock does that. Billy Wilder does that.
Lawrence and Lee used to do that. I mean, the great old American playwrights.
And I find it's earned, it's unsentimental, and it's richly satisfying. It's an accomplishment.
But let me ask you though, from what I heard though, did you have the ending in place right away, or you were really working up?
I truly found the play as I wrote it. I started it earlier than I usually start. I mean, usually I think about things a long time before I start writing, and there were sort of bizarre circumstances that conspired to necessitate that I write 20 pages of this play well before I was ready. And so I wrote the first 20 pages and I was not sure what I had at all. And then some people saw it and there was sort of a real liveliness to the reception of it. And so I was relieved, but completely unprepared. And so I had to just keep proceeding without actually knowing what was going to happen next. And so honestly, I finished the first act and I thought, I have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, the play truly led me through it.
Well, when
in
did
the
you
writing.
decide to write a play about the
About a
dark and sleazy world of
stamp.
stamp collecting?
Yes, is this a hobby of yours?
No, it's not. I have been interested in collectors. I'm interested in the way the human heart kind of yearns for things to fill it, and the strangeness of the collectible object, and how that becomes something that provides such satisfaction to people. And I actually do think Murray Abraham, who plays the stamp collector, really has found that place where hunger and love meet.
It's interesting, though, what you say about, and I want to get involved in this a little more, collecting, the mania for collecting. Because in a way, it never, ultimately with these characters, it never really can be satisfied. I mean, you get the one thing you want so much, but then there's something else that you don't have that you have to keep going. I mean, what's the psychology of that in a character?
Well, I think that there's the as Theresa said, the notion that there's some hole in all of our souls. I mean, many would find the four of us shooting the breeze about the new season on Broadway or a play on Broadway a completely eccentric way to pass an hour. What do? You've got to fill up this time.
By the way, we kill our guests afterward.
Satisfy
some heat.
Satisfy these longings, and people project their desires onto the wildest things, be they Broadway performance or
Butterflies.
Butterflies,
Wonderful
and
play you wrote,
another
The Butterfly
great play of
Collection.
Theresa's, or stamps. I mean, we've spent a lot of time with some high-level philatelists, who are an amazing bunch. And there's this beautiful, not far from where we are right now in the 30s, there's the Collectors Club, which is a Stanford White building that's where the collectors gather and discuss things like the Spanish postal system before
They get really
adhesive
worked up.
stamps.
What are they like?
I attended kind of a fascinating lecture about how mail was handled in the New World in the 16th century. No, you can easily go down these rabbit holes, and the elegant thing is that these tiny objects open entire worlds. A little slip of paper with the silhouette of Queen Victoria on it has associations which go, colonialism and trade and imperial development and cultural clashes. And people look at these tiny things, achieve ownership of them, and then just unpack boxes within boxes until you've got a world.
This sounds like the structure of a well-made play. You have an isolated small thing that opens into a whole universe.
And perhaps that was it. Because I just started with the stamps.
Well, what brought you to that?
Oh, honestly, it's a slightly ludicrous story. I was working on something else, I can't even remember what, on my computer, and tragically, the internet is also on the instrument that I write on. So whenever I hit a wall and I feel like, I click onto the internet and I start to troll just because I'm like, procrastinating. And I followed that little hand, that little hand that shows up and you go, click on the hand and it'll take you somewhere. And I truly just followed it until it landed on this web page, which I don't believe exists anymore. I've tried to find it again, but it was a collection. There was some Spanish lord. Again, Spain shows up in Stampland. It was a Spanish lord who had some collection that was on, it was a historical collection and it was going on auction, and you could look at, and I mean, it was sort of, it was a miraculous sort of thing. I kept thinking, really? And the little hand would click on some of the stamps and tell you what these individual stamps were worth. And I clicked on this one stamp and it said it was worth $1.4 million. And I could not I thought maybe I was misreading it, you know, like maybe it was in pesos or something, and it wasn't. And then I started investigating that particular stamp.
And this is the real stamp in the play, the Mauritius.
It was those two stamps.
And
yeah.
what is unique about these two stamps? Why are they worth $1.4 million?
They're actually
$6 million.
together. The two of them together, uncanceled, would be worth upwards of $6 million. We think maybe at this
And
point.
do two exist out there uncanceled?
Well, they do on the stage.
They do on the
of
stage,
Biltmore.
but in real life, we don't know. We
They
don't know.
they may not. Perhaps
Yeah.
they'll come to light. I mean, that's the little miracle
It's like
that
the Maltese
ignites the
Falcon.
play is
Yeah.
that
Right.
it surfaces in an unlikely place.
And that is true with stamp collecting, that those things do surface. I learned all this incredibly, I thought, interesting things about stamps, like these missionary stamps, you know, that are very old Hawaiian stamps and very, very rare. And someone found a whole bunch of them in a Bible that came down through their family, and they were convinced. They had taken them to collectors, and they all said, no, those are forgeries, because they had the wrong kind of cancellation marks on them. And then just last year, someone else turned up the historical evidence that, in fact, the cancellation marks were appropriate to the period. And so suddenly, this handful of stamps that so the granddaughter of somebody who, you know, had been carrying around for years, insisting that they were real, suddenly they were worth a significant fortune.
Even more. It is a fascinating play.
It's a terrific play,
It's now
yeah.
at the Biltmore.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for
Mauritius by Theresa Rebeck, directed by Doug Hughes.
coming. And you must
you.
stop back by and tell us what's going on at
the roundabout.
roundabout.
Which you'll have nothing
I'll
to do
be
with
a
because-
mole at the roundabout.
Much
I
success.
already have a few
Yeah,
there.
I'm
Don't
sure
worry.
you do.
I've got that theater covered. Thanks a lot for being a guest tonight on
Thank
Theater
you.
Talk.
Pay me $10,000 and you will.
I don't have to pay you one red cent. I own those stamps.
Not yet, you don't.
Dennis,
Perry,
you sure about that?
it's movement, Sterling. Look, to be philosophical, and I see no reason not to at times like this. When the river stops flowing, all the fish die. You give her the money, or we got a dead fish.
It takes great courage to murder the first time. That's when you can no longer claim your soul as your own. After that, it becomes remarkably simple. You'd never be quite sure what lay around the corner, would you, dear?
Charles Busch has been an off-Broadway fixture for going on, what now, 3 decades, Charles, is it?
That'll do.
What's with this?
He had an occasional foray on Broadway a few years ago with Tale of the Alger's Wife, but it's I think fair to say that he has really kept off-Broadway going all of these years, going way back to your first show, which was
Vampire Lesbians of Sodom.
in what year?
Ooh, 1985.
1985.
Yeah.
And since then, there's almost a season doesn't go by without a Charles Busch off-Broadway show.
Really? I haven't. It's really, to me, it seems like it's been years. Yeah.
I think of you as the incredibly prolific writer and creator of the fabulous feature film Die, Mommie, Die in 2003, which you're now bringing to the stage, and a remarkable accomplishment. And I wonder, Charles, why it is you're reprising
You're
your role
buttering him
in
up.
Die, Mommie, Die on the stage now for people to see.
You're wondering, why would I do that?
No, that's not the way I said it. That's not the
John, you too. You know, first of all, I'm so nervous. One time I was on the show and I was wearing this big sweater, big turtleneck sweater, and evidently it was all bunched up, and neither of you said a word.
Well,
and
talk
I
to
looked
the
like
booth
I
on
looked
that
like
one.
Uncle Fester. So now I don't trust either of you.
Now you look like Aunt Fester today.
Now I look like I'm doing Star Trek. Yeah, so
That's because Kate Mulgrew was in your last play.
yeah.
That's the little shirt that she gave you, right? From
Exactly. Anyway, back to my play, Die, Mommie, Die. Yes, it's taken a long route to get off Broadway. And it started off as a play, and I did it in Los Angeles for a little brief run.
Yeah.
In about, I think, around 2000. And while I was doing it, I thought, this would really make a perfect indie film, because it kind of all takes place in this one sort of Beverly Hills mansion. With about a family, so it's a small cast. So very quickly it became a film, rather amazingly so, because so many films take, even a little indie film takes 10 years. And then Carl Andrus, who's directed many of my plays in the past few years, thought we should do it in New York, and I started thinking about it, and I just got all these new ideas of how I wanted to make the play richer, and how it takes place in 1967, and what a fascinating period, of course, that was. And I mean, really, the 60s, I think maybe more than any decade other than maybe 1910 to 1920, there was more change in that decade than anything. I mean,
what's the sort of style of movie that you've based this on?
Well, a friend of mine said that you don't satirize movie genres, you do subgenres. Because I'm kind of a movie. I'm sort of an amateur film historian, I guess. So the movies that interest me wouldn't be sort of film noir. It's something very, very specific. In this case, it's a genre that has been called Grand Dame Guignol.
Hush, Sweet Charles.
Yeah, started off with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane,
Right.
which was this big sleeper hit with Joan Crawford and Betty Davis, and showed that if you got two aging actresses who needed the work, they really would humiliate themselves on screen, and a lot of people would like to see it. These movies were kind of horror, suspense films, and they were trying to sort of approach the new sort of 60s sensibility.
In a wonderfully dated way now, though. But you can see at the time they thought they were really being funky.
But they were even in a bit dated back then, because when you see movies from like 1967 which have references to acid trips or the new kind of sexuality, Hollywood didn't really have a vocabulary for that, so they still were using the same conventions from women's pictures of the 30s and 40s, but just somehow it's twisted around to fit this new sensibility. And in rethinking the play, I thought in a way the characters are doing the same thing. And this film producer, who's the husband, has in 1960 his great moment had been when he defied the blacklist. But now by 1967 his form of liberalism is being questioned. I thought actually the characters themselves, are suffering the same kind of dislocation that since the country did. It sounds rather pretentious, but
but this is a weighty play.
Well, it is, and it's a light comedy, sort of comedy thriller. But I always kind of like to have something else going on at the same time. And in a certain sense, I am trying to say something about this very odd period of our history where the old rules didn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually though that's something that as critics have picked up on in your work. I mean, the sort of Charles Busch image is fun, light, you're going to be doing your wonderful characters and all that kind of stuff. But I think of a wonderful play of yours, Red Scare on Sunset. Hilarious on the surface, but really dealing with a lot of those issues of communism in Hollywood at the time, but not from the traditional point of view.
It was rather even-handed satire. But some people really didn't get that at all, because at the end I played this rather vapid movie actress who, with great nobility at the end of the play, names names, including her own husband, for his own good. But I thought that was more interesting to do it as a right-wing nightmare than as the obvious thing would be about some poor leftists who's hounded out of their career, and I didn't think that was particularly amusing. So, but back to the current play, I do like to. I always like to ground these genre parodies with both, something to say larger, like whether it's the McCarthy era or I fought the Nazis and The Lady in Question.
I don't think I've ever asked you, when did the whole idea of you doing these roles in drag begin? I mean, you weren't a drag queen, were you? You were a playwright. You were a playwright, but how did that evolve?
Well, I wanted to act, and I just wanted to be on the stage all my life. And I guess I initially thought that I would just have a traditional acting career. And then I went to college, went to Northwestern, and it was a big theater department, and I was a theater major. And I just got, the message early on that I was an odd type, and I was, maybe too gay or too thin or too eccentric, and that it was going to be difficult.
Were they not casting you in things?
I was never in a play, ever.
You were at the drama department.
Never, ever in a play. It was really, it got me to thinking, And, because really, a theater department is kind of a microcosm of show business in a way, and all the same, people wannabes
and the people who made it and the people who haven't.
And fallen stars. And so I thought, I don't think this is going to happen. And then also, the other thing was I really couldn't think of a list of parts that I was dying to play. And I thought, if you're going to do something as insane as be an actor and starve to death and everything, you should have this long list. I want to play Hamlet and Peer Gynt and
Cyrano
I couldn't
de
think of
Bergerac.
anything I wanted to do, so maybe Blanche. So I started thinking maybe I could write roles for myself, and then I began being exposed to more experimental theater, because I'm from New York City, and when I would come home on vacation, and I would see Charles Ludlam and
Theater of the Ridiculous, all those.
Yes, and the Performance Group and Jeff Weiss and all these extraordinary performers. And I thought, oh, a theatrical experience can be whatever I choose it to be, as long as I don't care about making any money. So really I began writing seriously just to give myself opportunities to act.
And Vampires, Lesbians, and Sodom, that was the first one that we said earlier.
Well,
did you write that with yourself in mind, of playing those?
Who else? No. Well, but I'd had this long career. I'd had 8 years as a solo performer where I was not in drag, and I was just wearing kind of just pants and shirt, and I would play. That. Yeah, and I toured all over the country. Well, I called it Charles Busch Alone with a Cast of Thousands, but it was a whole kind of repertory of pieces that I had developed over the course of almost a decade.
Did you do costumes? And
No, it was very minimalist. There'd be no set, maybe a chair, and I was just in a shirt and pair of pants, and I would do these very complicated, they were almost like screenplays where I played all the characters, men and women, and I love narrative. It wasn't enough for me to do just sort of a character sketch.
Right.
I wanted to tell I always loved telling a story. So I would do this whole thing. I'd spin around, and I'd be the old Irish fisherman, and then I'd stand up, and I was the countess, and then I was the young man who was looking for the truth of his father's death, and all this, and the thing was that I did it for like 8 years, and it really was like being in vaudeville, because I learned so much about narrative and characterization and performing in front of every kind of audience and by myself, and establishing a relationship, with a very intimate relationship with the concept of an audience, and so by the time, so after all these years, when I actually got my kind of break, when we did this Vampire Lesbians of Sodom play, and I just played one role, just one female character, the audience in a sense was seeing a rather honed performer because of all these years.
8 years of doing that kind of
doing all this. And I used to put it down a lot in my first career, but looking back, and I think certainly showed a lot of initiative, because I never had any kind of management, and I booked myself all over the country for 8 years in different cities, and I would just show up sometimes in San Francisco or Chicago or Washington, D.C., and I would just show up, and I'd make appointments with the different nonprofit theaters, and just kind of do part of my act, and then if they liked me, they'd and usually it was just because they liked me.
Right. Now Charlie's back. Let's give him a shot.
Then they'd say, well, here, why don't you come in 6 months and be a cheap part of our season where we don't need a set or anything,
I can see, though, in your plays, though, how that has worked itself out, too, because all of the characters in your plays are so sharp and so distinctive, and you get the wonderful actors like Julie Halston, who are sharp and distinctive in themselves, to play those parts.
Yes.
And I can see how you, having to play all these parts as one person, you would have to make them that sharp and distinct to separate them from each one.
Immediately, and I had to do it in this kind of performance. It had to be an immediate thing within. The audience can never be confused for even a millisecond of who that new character is. So yes, it had to be in the writing and in the performance. And that's why it was marvelous when I had my original theater company, Theater in Limbo. All the actors in that ensemble had what we used to call their trip. This certain characteristics, a vocal mannerism or personality trait that I could write, and it was almost like having an old movie studio contract system, where I had to, and the challenge was to write a play to fit all these 8 people, and allow them to do their trip. At the same time, it couldn't be the same play every time.
Right.
They'd do their trip, but then give them something a little new, a new color to it. So it was kind of great, and I miss it.
Fascinating. I can't wait to see Die, Mommie, Die, which, like everybody else in the theater, is taking a movie and adapting it for the stage. Young Frankenstein, Legally Blonde, Die, Mommie, Die.
Well, this was a play, then
that's true.
A play, then a movie, and now a better play.
And you open October 21st, is that correct?
Yes.
And you're at what theater are you at?
New World Stages.
New World Stages, all right.
Yeah, and it's going to be a very lavish production. This set is going to be just gorgeous. It's a big, Hollywood mansion. And
wow, you've come a long way from schlepping your one-man show with no props around the country.
I know. I'm still bringing my wigs in the shopping bag.
Yeah. Charles, it's always great to see you. You're a terrific guest and a good friend of ours. Thanks for being our guest tonight on Theater Talk.
Thank you.
You're nothing
but a campy showbiz joke. Have you forgotten your last summer stock tour at Molly Brown? The booze, the walkouts, the raspberries. Unfortunately, it was in the round. The management was unable to ring down the curtain. They had to drag you off the stage before the rotten eggs hit you.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
Playbill Online is the official website of Theater Talk and the home of the Playbill Club, providing information and opportunities for theater lovers. We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.